Today we're going to look at Joseph and his brothers. Over the last couple of weeks we've been looking at the patriarchs, the children and the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Esau, Joseph, and his brothers. So we've been kind of following through and looking at the family drama that kind of takes place in the midst of these people that we look up to, because God came through and took some bad situations and brought some really good things out of it. And we'll see that again today as we look at the life of Joseph. What we're talking about today covers 13 chapters of the Bible, so we're going to kind of do some storytelling. If you want to read all the details, you can look at Genesis 37 through 50, the last part of the Bible. The fact is, it's like there's almost more written about Joseph than almost any character in the Bible. We have so many insights and details into the different things that went on in his life. And so it's neat how God has preserved that so we can see those. A lot of the stories in the Bible, they just kind of give us the big version. You just kind of go right through it and you don't get bogged down on details, but this story has lots of them. So we will take a look at that today. Joseph's father Jacob, as we looked at last week, had a very dysfunctional family. Okay, there were 4 wives and about a dozen, at least, sons and more children thrown into the mix. Everybody competing with each other, lots of envy, lots of strife, lots of competition going on in that family. So Joseph grows up in this, and Joseph is the oldest son of the favored wife. And so to Jacob, Joseph was very, very, very special. And so as his brothers saw that Joseph was very special in his father's eyes, they became very jealous of him. And they came up with a plan, first of all, to kill him. But then they decided, why kill him? Why don't we just sell him off and get some money off of this? So they sell 17-year-old Joseph off into slavery. He's taken to Egypt, where he becomes a servant in one of the high officials' homes. The high official was named Potiphar. And so he was sent there. Meanwhile, the brothers took the colored coat of Joseph, dipped it in blood, ripped it all up, took it back to their father and said, we found this, and it must be Joseph's, and it must be that he was torn apart by a wild animal. Well, of course, Jacob, who's lost his favorite wife, he's lost his favorite son. I mean, he's really in grief of how his life has played out. He has these other sons who fight and bicker amongst themselves, and they're up to no good, and they're doing evil things. You can read about that in the Bible too. They just were not giving any honor to Jacob at all. But the son who had integrity was gone, and so Jacob is very disturbed about this, not knowing that his son Joseph is actually alive and in Egypt, although he was a slave. But Joseph's integrity served him well in that home that he was in. The fact is, Potiphar saw that he was such a well-respected and full of integrity, honest young man that he gave him more responsibility and eventually became the head of the household, and he ran all of the household affairs for Potiphar. Well, Potiphar's wife, she saw Joseph as a guy that she would love to have a relationship with, and she would tempt him over and over again. And Joseph withstood those temptations. In fact is, he would say to her, as we read here, he said, he, as in Potiphar, her husband, he has not kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? It wasn't just a matter of, sinning against Potiphar or her or himself. It was, he realized what he would have been doing would be sinning against God. He had a standard that he didn't want to compromise with. And maybe he could have gotten away with it. Maybe she did a lot of things to try to encourage him to follow through with her advances. I'm sure there was some manipulation and things going on, but he withstood it time after time after time again. Joseph knew the standards, and he wasn't going to compromise, even in a situation like this. And so even though he went through the trials of being unfairly kidnapped by his brothers, put into slavery, sent to a foreign country, now he's head of a household, and he's being tempted through the trials and temptations. He stands strong. It shows what kind of heart he had. And he's a young man here. He's a very young man, and he had the standards that allowed him to not compromise. And when we choose to do the right things, even when no one's watching, even if we could get away with it, it speaks to the power of God in our lives that keeps us able to keep the standard high and keep it on the right path. Sin destroys ourselves, it destroys other people around us, and it hurts the witness that we have of the Lord. And through the trials and temptations that Joseph had, he kept integrity high, and he kept the focus on the God that was within him and helping him to stand, even in light of those things. Potiphar's wife, she was very angry at Joseph because he did not give in to her advances, and just her love turned to rage, and she was so angry with him that she accused him of trying to rape her and went to her husband with this. And her husband, believing his wife, had Joseph put into prison for what he had allegedly done. So here we have Joseph, okay? He's gone from being kidnapped by his brothers, almost killed by them, sold off into slavery, into a foreign country. He actually kind of has some success, but then he's falsely accused of something he didn't do, and now he's in prison. Okay? Not quite the life story any of us would want to be able to claim for our own. But while in prison, the guards that were there, they found that Joseph was full of integrity. He was somebody that they could trust, and he kind of became the head of the prison. Everything that happened inside of there with the other prisoners, he was given the responsibility to take care of those things. And it says in Genesis 39:23, it says, "The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed." Sounds like the prison guards just passing off the job to somebody else instead of doing it. We don't know what it was, but the guard didn't want to go in there. He didn't want to mess with what was going on. But Joseph was in charge, and he had a liaison, and he was able to do that. And so Joseph is in prison. Actually, he's there maybe almost like 20 years. Okay? Most of his youth. Think that through his 20s and 30s, he's like in prison. While he was there, he interpreted the dream of another prisoner, and that prisoner was going to be freed, and that prisoner said that, well, when I get out, I'm going to go to Pharaoh and tell them about you, that you were put in here with false accusations, and therefore I'm going to help you get out. Well, that prisoner got out, but forgot about Joseph and didn't do it. So again, Joseph is discouraged because he has somebody that's a comrade that says, I'm going to help you, and doesn't do it. A promise broken. And so he continues to live in that prison for a long, long time. Eventually, Pharaoh had a dream that he wanted to have an interpretation for. He thought it meant something, and nobody could interpret it. But somebody then remembered, oh yeah, there's this guy in prison that has a God who helps him to be able to do this. And so Joseph is brought up, cleaned up out of prison, brought to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's dream was such that in the interpretation, it was that Joseph told him that there's going to be 7 years of famine, 7 years of good crops, followed by 7 years of famine. So therefore, what we need to do is prepare for the famine by keeping some of the crops that we have during the abundant years, and be ready so that when the famine hits, we're going to be fine. And Pharaoh was so impressed that he says, I want you, Joseph, I want you to be in charge of the whole grain collection and distribution during this time. And so Joseph, again, is brought from down low up high. Because we're told that in Genesis 41:38, Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh saw that truly God, the God that he didn't even worship. Pharaoh didn't have the God that Joseph did, but he saw that there was the true Spirit of God inside of him. And so he was able to be put in charge for all this thing. Here we have Joseph, who is got these circumstances, but he lets the Spirit of God still flow through him. He doesn't let it be darkened. He doesn't let it be hid. Even if the even if the atheist or the agnostic that doesn't believe in God, when they see the Spirit of God in our lives, they still may not acknowledge that God, but they know that there's something inside of us. They may call it a spark, they may call it an aura, they may call it you've been blessed with something special, because they don't know how to put the words on it. But they see, and they can see the Spirit of God inside of us. And it's based on who we are, not based on the circumstances around us. Over the last year, one person I know was going through a really hard time. And this person started really asking the questions, where is God in the midst of it? And we met together and talked and prayed, and this person could really see how God was with them in this hard circumstance. But then all of a sudden things got to change and things kind of smoothed out and got bright and beautiful, and they just kind of threw the God out of there, out of the picture, because everything was going really well. I know another person this last year, things were going really well. This person's, worshiping God and doing all the right things, and then hard times come, and this person just wants nothing to do with God and with us. And I try to get in touch with this person, and they just ignore my attempts. Our circumstances sometimes, whether they're good or bad, they fluctuate and they affect our relationship with God. But whether it's good or bad, God wants to see that we have consistency, that we're with Him no matter what the circumstances are. And Joseph showed that by having the Spirit of God inside of him. And so now Joseph is raised up. Think about it. He's gone from being kidnapped by his brothers, almost killed, sold into slavery, sent to a faraway country. He rises up in his position, gets falsely accused, put in prison. He's there for most of his youth. He is given a promise that was unfulfilled. Then he finally gets up to a place where he is being blessed and used by God in a very special way. And then what happens? His brothers show up. His brothers, who were in the other country, they had the famine too. And they knew that there was grain in Egypt. And so they went, and obviously this was happening. People were coming from far away saying, Egypt has grain. Can we buy some grain from you? And Joseph, being the guy in charge of the grain, he sees his brothers come in. They don't recognize who he is. Of course, they have no idea what's happened in Joseph's life, so they wouldn't even be expecting him, even if they thought it did kind of look like him. But, probably 30 years have passed. So you see somebody when they're 17, and then you see them 30 years later. They may look a little bit different than they did then. But he recognized them. Of course, he could hear them speak. He knew their language. He could tell what was going on there. And when he recognized them, he had a dilemma. What was he going to do? The power over their lives was in his hand. Was he going to have revenge? Now, he did trick them a little bit. He played a few little psychological games, and you can read about that in the scriptures. He kind of tested them a little bit to kind of see, what's going on here. And eventually, he revealed his identity to them. And they were shocked. They were actually afraid, because when they realized who he was, they thought, oh no, he's certainly going to have revenge on us. Not only is he not going to give us food, he's going to take our lives. That would have been the normal thing to do, the natural thing to do. But we read that he says to them with this perspective. He says, don't be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. It was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and ruler over the land of Egypt. Now he has perspective. Yes, there were a lot of hardships in his life, but things didn't go always smoothly the way that he would have dreamed it would have. But now he gets it. He goes, oh, I see why this happened. This was all going to happen, and this was all going to come together, and God was going to use me to help bring the food, the situation that you have, under control, to preserve your lives. And so he sees how God has led him through this ups and downs of life to get him to a place that, wow, he was being used for something that was beyond his wildest dreams. But I hear this and I'm thinking, well, couldn't God have just made it a little simpler? Couldn't Joseph just been a very outstanding young man that had big dreams and plans. And he said, Father, I'm going to go off and change the world. Send me out with your blessing. And Jacob said, yeah, you go out and do it. And he took off to Egypt because that was the power place of the world. And he wheeled and dealed and did all the right things. And he worked his way up in the kingdom so he could be the grain giver. I mean, that would have been the version that we would all love to see if we were in his place. Why the ups and downs? Actually, more downs than ups. Why did he have to go through all this to get to this place? You know, injustice, the things that happened to Joseph, in a simpler sense, a lot of the times, happens to us as well. You know, people don't treat us fairly. People don't appreciate us. People might falsely accuse us of something. People might forget their promises. I mean, we have things like that happen. Now, I don't think anyone here has been unjustly sent to jail or unjustly sent to be a slave. You know, we haven't gone quite to those depths. You know, we haven't had our brothers trying to have a plot to kill us, probably. Although, I think there was a time my brother wanted to kill me. But seriously, though, we've not even dealt with some of those things. We've dealt with other things. And we look back at our lives and we look at the perspective and we say, where was God in the midst of all this? The ups and the downs, you know? And if we look back with perspective, at the time, we can't figure it out at all. But we look back and we go, oh, okay, I kind of get it now. And Joseph had this perspective in his life that helped him to be able to say, there were rough patches, there were good days, but God was in them all, and it got me to the place where God wanted me to be. Thomas Paine said, reputation is what men and women think of us, and character is what God and the angels know of us. So if you take character and reputation together, and it shows our integrity. Our integrity is shown by what other people see in us, our reputation. Our character is developed by who we are when it's just God watching. And so as we put those things together, then we are people of integrity. And if we're people of integrity, we're going to catch people's attention, have an opportunity to show them who the God is behind our lives. We're talking about how we live it out. As we live it is one way that we're able to spread God's word to other people. We could speak about God and we can show all kinds of acts of service to God, but if our lives don't show it in the first place, then all those other things are just going to be seen as hypocritical in the eyes of people who need the Lord. So it starts with us. We look at ourselves and we just today examine our own lives. Are we able to have the type of integrity that's kind of like in Joseph's life, despite some of those circumstances? Can we have integrity? He didn't compromise his beliefs. He was willing to serve God in any circumstance. He kept the Spirit of God alive in himself, and we get to do that as well. And we wait to get perspective on things. And as we do that, then we're going to be